Very nice to meet you, and thank you for spending Wednesday morning with us. My name is Marianne Halverson. I have my day job and my career over 20 years now has been an insurance broker. So I work for Aon. And my passion project is Contact Source. And our tagline is making connections that matter. And we do this through these virtual events now during COVID, but we also do them here at my loft downtown, where we do in-person, smaller, curated events to connect private equity investors, people that are looking for capital funding, or whether it's deals to acquisitions. And we've been doing that for 8 years now. It's been fun during COVID, believe it or not. I've had COVID, but it's been fun to see how we could connect this virtual way and expand the breadth of connections. So we've been doing now over 40 of these, Kontakt over Kaffe. They're nothing rocket science. They're a little bit different than other webinar per se, because they're meant to be a discussion. So we encourage every one of you guys to have your camera on. There's people here that you probably want to connect with after this call. We send everybody the list of the people that are participating. So I encourage you to take a peek at that list and send an email if you want to do a one-on-one with anybody on that list, because that's why we do these calls. We bring the thought leadership like as of today, and I'm excited to have AJ, Ran, and Stuart kind of bring the conversation to light and encourage you all to make comment, ask question, and make it as dynamic as possible for the next hour. And how the next hour is going to go, we're going to go around and everybody get a chance to introduce yourself. You can share just your name, what you do, and who was so kind to invite you here today, and who do you want to thank for bringing you to our community.
I'm going to turn it over to Stuart James to talk specifically about healthcare and technology and AI adoption. And after that, he'll turn it over to Ram to speak specifically about how they're able to, crack the AI nut in healthcare in some of their various solutions. Stuart?
Thank you, Ajay, and again, thank you everyone for being here. I'm excited about the opportunity, and I've got to say, I love the format. We always get into these PowerPoint presentations, and I love not doing that, so we're just going to have a conversation today, and I think that your questions will probably be the best part of this. But I've been in healthcare now for 30 years, starting out as a biomedical technician and working my way up to CIO roles, and now as a deputy CIO at Christus. And I can tell you that as a technologist in healthcare, it's amazing just to see how much we lag every other industry in the adoption of technology. All right, and there are many reasons for that. In some cases, it's just the nature of what we do. People want healthcare to be personal. They want to go see a doctor. They don't want to go see a computer, even though some of that might be changing and the computers can help. Doctors, and then we've got one on the phone, and you'll find that there's never any offense to doctors, but they go through a training program, right? It takes way more than any of us go through, and it's a rite of passage, and they do that to come out and become experts, and yes, they're scientists, but in many cases they're artists, and they're unique, and each doctor brings something to the table. So the idea of automating what they do, right, runs contrary to the culture. Healthcare is the only industry that I'm aware of where we argue that computers and automation make us less efficient rather than more efficient. Other industries, they worry about the computers being so efficient that they lose jobs. And in healthcare, we always hear, oh, that's going to slow me down. That's going to make us less efficient. So it's a really difficult space to automate. Also, what we do is not as proceduralized and structured, right? We always talk about, standards of care and consistency. As I said, each patient is unique. Each physician is unique. So the idea of standardizing something in a way that it can be automated is also usually a challenge for us in healthcare. And we've been struggling with that for at least as long as I've been in the field. We're getting better. COVID has helped to accelerate some of that, but still, technology in healthcare has been a challenge for us, and we've lagged every other industry in the adoption. So that's what I've spent my entire career doing, is trying to bring that marriage together. I used to say early on that it's really a beautiful thing because people are great at making decisions, right? Really smart doctors and other people in the healthcare profession are really good at making decisions, but humans are not that good at processing vast amounts of information, which is what we're surrounded by in healthcare. Computers, on the other hand, are really, really good. This is what I used to say. I'm gonna update it and tell you where I am. Are really, really good at processing vast amounts of information and distilling it down to what you need to make a decision. So I spent the first 20 something years of my career preaching that, hey, you should welcome this because it makes you better. It simplifies what you've got to do. And I said, computers don't make decisions. They just help you to make decisions because they don't think. They just process vast amounts of information, and you bring the logic into decision making. In recent years, I've had to update that, right? Because while computers still technically are not thinking, with AI, they're getting pretty close to thinking. So I have to be careful with that messaging. But I still think it's a beautiful thing, the way that marriage comes together. I'll talk some more about AI specifically in a little while. But that's kind of the environment and the challenge that we face, where there's this resistance and where we're lagging. On the other side, there's huge demand for automation in healthcare because we do so much, right? And there's, as I said, so much information, and we're under so much pressure of time that we can't get it all done. People worry about the computers taking their jobs, even though they say it makes them less efficient. They still at some point think it'll happen. Years ago with voice recognition, we heard that transcription was going to disappear. That didn't happen, right? Voice recognition coexists with transcription. It's very well right now. With ICD-10, we went from a code set that exploded by orders of magnitude in terms of the way we had to code and get billed, etc., which was when I actually got introduced to Buddy, because their first use case in the AI space was trying to solve that problem. And even with the complexity of ICD-10 that terrified us as an industry, and we were worried that we would go out of business because we couldn't code, we still did not turn to technology and say, please save us, which it can, right? It's been a very slow and painful curve, as Ram and the team will tell you, but it's really, really starting to pick up. And much like voice recognition made transcription better, AI is going to make coding better. It's going to make us more consistent. It's not only going to help us financially, right, as we're able to do better with our reimbursement and managing that, it's going to help us with quality. Because one of the reasons that the ICD-10 data set is so complex is because of the taxonomy, such that we can do a better job with the data, right? It makes the data much more powerful, which allows us to do better things with population health and do the things that we need to do. So I think that the time for AI in healthcare is now. There are many, many use cases, coding being one of them. But people are starting to use AI in healthcare for diagnostics, right? It's built into diagnostics machines. You can upload images and they can start to diagnose them. And these things are in various stages of maturity. But I think that AI in healthcare is definitely here to stay. And we need companies like Buddy who will make it real, right? It's an evolution, just like everything else we do. But the time is very, very much now. And we're seeing the benefits of that. We're seeing it become normal and being adopted. We're seeing changes like COVID has changed everything in the world. COVID has changed us. I've spent a lot of time in the last few months implementing AI, implementing bots, right, for screening, virtual assistants. You can go in and get your symptoms checked to see whether or not you might be at risk for COVID or what type of education you need. You can use it to schedule your appointments, get copies of your records, and all those things are starting to creep in. So I think the time is now. We've got companies in the space that go in niches and do different things. But what I found, and part of the reason I joined Buddy years ago, was because they took a foundational approach to this. They wanted to really get the data, get the science behind it, get the data scientists involved, and build a platform and build models. And they've taken many years to build a model for coding, and I feel like we've got that crack now and we can do more there. But that's just the beginning, right? Image recognition, the potentials are endless once you get into this field, you get the foundation in place, and you get partners, and there are more and more of us in healthcare who are emerging now to see the benefits of this, and it's going to be a differentiator. Healthcare is not going to continue to be the last industry that is not driven by data and excellence in data and data science. So I'll stop there with that lead in and turn it over to Ram.
Yeah, just a question came in, and it was AJ that came in with a question. How COVID has, and AJ, you might want to ask it yourself, but he was asking, how has COVID-19 affected the adoption of technology in healthcare?
Sure. So it's done a number of things. First off, it has created a crisis. And one of the things that I learned in leadership a long time ago is never waste a good crisis. Things that we have been trying to do for years have happened in hours or weeks because of necessity. The federal restrictions that stopped us from doing telemedicine, for example, came down. Those walls just came crashing down. And within weeks, we had increased 40, 50, 60x the number of telemedicine visits that we were doing. So that adoption of technology, both culturally, right? Doctors who said they wouldn't do it, they wanted to be real, they didn't want to practice over telemedicine. They found that they had to for a couple of reasons. One, their patients were scared to come to them, so they weren't going to have any business if they didn't do telemedicine. Two, they were scared to go to their patients, right? Believe it or not, doctors are afraid of getting COVID also. Three, some of them got COVID and had to quarantine, and they were able to work at home thanks to technology. With the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the FUD that we talk about with COVID, people have needed more information, and call centers were getting overwhelmed with people trying to call. So we put bots on our websites and on our IVRs where you can call, and you can go through a structured process where the bot will help you to put you at ease or connect you to a virtual visit. If you said, hey, yes, I've got these symptoms, and yes, I need to care, you click here, you're connected to somebody who will immediately do a virtual visit for you. So those things are happening in addition to what we're doing right now, all the Zooming, all the virtual collaboration. It's just really thrust technology to the forefront. And, we've prepared in healthcare for a long time for disaster recovery, where how do we function when we don't have technology, right? Our systems are down. Something is taken out of our systems. We've got people in buildings who need to work, and we go with these downtime procedures. COVID flipped that on its head and says, hey, how do we function when we've got technology and we don't have people? All right, all these people aren't here and they need to work. So let's use the technology to connect them. But I can keep going, but I don't want it to be a monologue. But COVID has created an environment where the adoption that has been so reluctant in healthcare has seen an explosion.
Yeah, I can see that. So Ram and AJ, do you want to go next? Turn it over to you guys.
Sure. Ram, could you speak about Buddy Health's experience with AI and implementing AI in healthcare?
100%. Well, thanks again for the invitation. And I can agree to almost everything what Stuart says. We've been working at Stuart for many, many years. And Stuart's insights are absolutely valuable with someone who's an insider in the healthcare community. I come from a background which is exactly the opposite of Stuart. I'm an outsider of healthcare. We're technologists. We love technology. We innovate technology. And when I got introduced to some of the problem statements in healthcare, I had to pretty much teach myself all the various different concepts in healthcare. But the overarching problem statement was not too unfamiliar to us, because in one side you have a lot of unstructured medical records and unstructured data, if you will. With that, what I mean is if each one of us go to a neighboring general physician or a primary care physician or an urgent care or an emergency situation, go to a hospital, you'll find that the medical record that you get from any of these places, either a clinic or a hospital, is all in paragraphs, right? And that's exactly how humans document. Now, those documents, in a technology term, we call it unstructured. And the reason why it's unstructured is because you can't, the machine can't make sense of it. A human has to interpret those paragraphs of medical record. It could be one page, could be, hundreds of pages. I heard an oncologist on the call, if you have a cancer patient going through, all the therapies, it's going to be, hundreds and hundreds of pages. Now, in those kind of situations, technology still hasn't, really evolved to read those medical records and make sense of it, and we're talking in 2020. So the complexities are through the roof, and that's really the inception of Buddy. So when we got to understand there's a huge opportunity on the revenue cycle of healthcare, essentially, how do the hospitals get paid? How does a physician get paid? And the fundamental business model, in healthcare, which they've been innovating over the last several decades in healthcare in the US, is the whole concept of medical codes and medical claims. The medical codes, if you will, is actually the bridge between, the insurance companies paying the provider community, the hospitals, physicians, if you will. And it's very complicated. And there's federal laws, there's state laws, there's federal insurance, CMS, Medicare, Medicaid. Then you have all the commercial insurance, which is like, a lot of people wouldn't know this, but there's more than 2,500 insurance companies in America, not 5 or 10. And the complexity is through the roof. And when we looked at the problem statement initially, from a complete outsider's standpoint, if you will, we said, okay, at a very high level, you have unstructured data on one side, you have structured taxonomy, which is the medical codes, which get paid by the insurance companies in America. And failing to do so, the providers actually lose money, or they don't get paid fully. We call it the denial, a partial denial or a full denial, which leads the hospitals to be in the red in the accounting or in account receivables. And they have to spend more dollars to get the same dollars. So it's financially, we thought the best approach to help this community was to see how we can automate by reading the medical records and be able to automate medical codes. So with that, I have a quick presentation to share. Let me see if I can actually share my screen, Marianne. Can I have the right to share my screen?
And can you make RAM an opportunity?
Yeah, yeah, you can share the screen now.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Appreciate it. Awesome. Well, so just to share some numbers here, let me see if I can maximize my, yeah, there you go. So we're looking at a wasteful spend, an annual wasteful spend on the administrative section of healthcare, on the medical coding billing, to the tune of actually $265 billion, in a year. Just wrap that number in your head for a second. Now, that's wasteful spend in a given year. Now, keep that in context that all that effort is towards actually getting the providers paid by the insurance companies in America. Now, 40% of those claims get denied because of erroneous medical codes. And it's a myriad of issues which results in denial. And part of the reason that it is not being able to automate is because 80% of all healthcare data is unstructured in nature. So, for example, Stewart's Hospital or a Kaiser Permanente in California could spend billions of dollars in very, very expensive EMR systems like Epic or Cerner. Well, they really are great systems for workflows, coordinating functions inside a hospital, a complicated hospital system. But they're really not good at actually in structuring the data. Imagine, if you will, you have a really expensive container, but the container still can't actually interpret what's the data inside the container. And that's the problem in healthcare today. So you have all these expensive Epic systems, but they couldn't really understand the data. 80% of the data is unstructured. And we also have a metric which has been validated by a lot of sources right now, which is not the 40% of physicians do complain about the burnout. And the burnout problem, again, is actually primarily on the administrative, overload, which is documentation is just one of the main key areas where the bar for documentation is very high today, because documentation in America, unfortunately, is now boiled down to reimbursements. If the physician doesn't document properly, both the physician and the hospital is going to lose money. So essentially, the bar is now very high for documentation, which means there's an added pressure on the physicians on that front for reimbursement, angle. And this is the number which just is staggering. The top, 100 hospitals combined, in America, is being told that they're losing $1.3 billion a day, with lack of these elective care procedures, and patients not getting into for regular checkups and other surgeries, and ED emergency, as much as actually it's spiked because of COVID, but emergency is a loss leader in healthcare. So it doesn't really help the hospital. In fact, it's a perfect storm for them. And so combine all these numbers. Where Buddy comes in is we are the company which comes in and structures the data, makes sense of all the federal laws in terms of actually the Medicare, Medicaid policies, and ensuring that we get those codes right, and make sure that we, part of this flagship product, Coding.ai, we essentially deliver those codes, part of the medical claim, so that we, kind of plummet those denials, if you will, and also reduce, two things happen. One is we reduce the cost of claim processing itself. There's a cost to submit the claim, and then we want to also ensure the claim gets paid. So we reduce the cost, and we also try to improve the reimbursement. So both of those are something which Buddy is actually doing today. So fundamentally, we started the journey with the automation of medical coding, but as Stuart said, we are now going both downstream and upstream in healthcare towards the clinical angle, because interestingly, when we automate coding, we see both the clinical and the cost at the same time. So we have an incredible ability to understand the clinical episode, agnostic to specialty today. And we process, north of 36 million, medical records in a fully automated. So I want to reemphasize that, because not often you hear in healthcare, the economies of scale, because the data is so noisy, unable to parse the medical records, with such clarity and be able to automate a critical function. We've achieved exactly that in the last, 7.5 years. It's a lot of hard work. Our largest customer is Change Healthcare, which is was a McKesson company, which has been spin off last year. But we have an incredible ability to automate, incredible volumes of charts in a given day, given month. And our technology is hosted in Microsoft Azure cloud, and they're incredible partners. They've invested in us in the cloud, and we are now, scaling this technology to the next steps with problem statements, including clinical models, across all specialties, prior authorization automation. We are into value-based care. How do we ensure that the providers actually can send the right metrics to CMS to make sure they're getting the right kind of reimbursements, their bonus, and prove the quality of care that they're actually providing at the site is something which is justified with the quality metrics that Buddy can help automate. So why are we different? Now, the reason why Buddy is kind of different from competition, and what we've been innovating over the last several years, is what you see in the screen right here. When a physician documents, you see that unstructured blob of text, which you all might have actually read those medical records. It could run in pages, and there's a lot of unstructured text which the physicians document, or the nurses document, or the specialist might document, or the lab results which you might get. Now, Buddy makes sense of all of that, right? When you say 66-year-old, well, for a human eye, that's easy, right? 66-year-old, I mean, you understand that's the age of the patient. Well, the machine has to understand this. So we've been training machines to understand how do physicians document right? One might say 66 YR, or one might write YEAR. One might add the S at the end of it. One might say Y apostrophe. Just so many, I could come up with like 6 or 7 different ways that someone could even express in a patient's age. And those are the complexities of AI, is to understand the specificity of every clinical named entity in a given medical record. Now, if that's complicated enough, let's say for something like radiology, where there's roughly 300 million transactions in America in a given year, now blow this up across all specialties. That's the problem statement Buddy is solving, which is almost like what Google has been doing for the last 25 years in World Wide Web, is what Buddy is doing for medical record data. And what we're really solving is actually using NLP technology, which is in the right in the middle of the screen, where every word, every clinical phrase, every numerical, and everything which is actually clinical in nature, which is represented, gets tagged, whether it's a body part or as an instrument, or is it a state, or is it, let's say, a medication or a dosage or frequency. So almost every attribute that one can think of is actually being documented and tagged on the NLP. Well, the common myth in the AI world is that NLP is going to give you context. Context meaning what happened to the patient at the clinical setting. Well, the answer is no. So what we've really done is gone to the next level, which is the graph. So the third column you see right there, you see this graph which blows up into chief complaint or a history of present illness. Now, all of these kind of sections is very familiar to a physician. Now, those are the sections which gets documented, let's say, in an ED setting, in an emergency setting, or even a patient visit across specialties in evaluation and management. And we essentially represent the blob of text you see on the first column to the graph on the last column to kind of simplify the whole context, if you will. The more you can contextualize the clinical episode, the more you can realize automation, to Stuart's point. COVID-19 has actually been a blessing for us, as much as actually it's such a pandemic which has caused so much of suffering and so much of loss of life. But in some ways, technologists like us who really aspire for doing good in healthcare, we to Stuart's point, take the crisis as an opportunity for us to see how we can improve healthcare and be able to insert the automation. And adoption has increased. We've grown probably 2.5 to 3x because of COVID, because the adoption has increased, because a lot of the administrative work, the workers that actually were sick, the workers couldn't work. Working remote is not the most efficient for a lot of the other organizations in healthcare. And in comes Buddy, which can automate 100% on the cloud. So one of the things that we are also doing for our clientele is that we do essentially 100% automation, of the transactions for our clientele. And we're also pragmatic on what we promise. What we're also saying is 70% of your volumes will get fully automated with no human intervention at all, with contractual guarantee on the accuracy of 95% or above. And the 30% is still going to be a manual review. And this approach is being a super hit with our clientele, because the kind of savings we deliver for our clientele is in the 7-digit on a year-to-year basis. So on the bottom, you see some of the metrics here. We've crunched 40 million medical records to train our algorithms on both the text. Very soon, we're getting into imaging as well. And we want to be a horizontal company to analyze both images and text and be able to improve the quality of care and reduce that administrative cost in healthcare. We have 1,000+ clinical named entities recognizing the various different elements in a medical record. And, we have a huge pipeline of algorithms we are patenting as well. This is a snapshot of the product. Essentially, we're working with, a lot of the products which has different workflows. Like I said, we deliver 95% plus accuracy across specialties. And we definitely want to say goodbye to complexity and hello to automation. So with that, I think I want to summarize by saying that Buddy is essentially the company which is focusing on the core problem in healthcare, which is unstructured data. Automation, there's in numerous opportunities. We're starting with one use case. We've married to that for several years, and we've actually cracked that code. Now we're going upstream with that confidence and with the market proven accuracy. We're going now upstream into clinical and downstream into billing automation as much, to start driving the savings to the providers and start improving the quality of care, which is actually much required. With that, I'll give it to Ajay.
Thank you, Ram. Jean-Luc asked a great question, which is, Jean-Luc, do you want to ask directly, or could I rephrase your question? Okay.
Go right ahead.
Okay. So he asked about, you're talking about coding, medical records and coding. What about other areas or other areas where AI is being used in healthcare, such as drug discovery, diagnosis, treatment? And what would be also interesting to know is which comes first. Are they first trying to automate coding, or are they first trying to automate things like diagnosis or drug discovery and so on and so forth?
Right. So I think let's set the context here. You have four fundamental pillars of healthcare. You have the providers, you have the payers, you have the pharma, and you have the patients, right? So you have essentially, when we talk about AI and we talk about what kind of products is some of these AI companies selling into, these are the four verticals, if you will. Now, within that, again, you got to pick your choice of actually where you're applying the AI, which is essentially, are you applying on the text, or applying on the images / videos, or you're applying on voice. Now, on top of that, the next question is, in the case of actually drug discovery, we're talking about, a lot of computational chemists, a lot of, biochemists, working with a whole bunch of molecular scientists and trying to come up with all these, molecules for drug discovery. Now, that was in the pharma, vertical. I'm going to give two different answers. One answer is AI companies, which are working in some of these verticals, we've seen they don't cross-pollinate. They don't really go from one vertical to another, because the focus helps them to actually do better, in a vertical. And even in one vertical, like pharma, which is a huge, market by itself, they would like to focus on one of the prompt statements. Now, so for Buddy, I think our goal is to be a horizontal company across all four verticals, because data, if it's unstructured across all. The medical records are viewed by the scientist at the drug discovery level of the pharma, or requests for information from payers who do prior authorization based on medical records, or providers who live and breathe on medical records, or the patients who want to understand their medical records. Now, across the board, when we structure the data, it actually impacts all four verticals. With respect to Buddy's intentions for the roadmap in the future, our goal is to get into the clinical side of things, including clinical trials. Our goal is actually to see how we can improve the matching of clinical trials, because we can do probably a better clinical trial than competition out there, because we understand medical records on one side and the protocols on the other side, and be able to match with a much better candidate pool that the trials actually could be having a better outcome. That's one area we can help. The other area we could help on the drug discovery phase is also on the efficacy. Now, a lot of the drug discovery is about how is existing molecules performing in the market, how can we improve. Now, even in that phase, you need to read medical records, you need to understand PubMed research articles, again, unstructured. Now, you can have tens of thousands of research paper publications. For example, in COVID-19, there are a lot of companies, working on trying to figure out how can you read all these research papers in COVID and see who's got a better efficacy of a drug or a vaccine. So we can help on that space as well to help foster drug, discovery in that sense. So I think the answer is you need AI in all of these verticals. Focus obviously helps, and there's no question of which comes first. All of the prompt statements you just mentioned are equally important, And I think it's just a matter of where that AI company is going to focus on. Our focus is more fundamental at the data level, which means we want to, penetrate all four verticals. In fact, we are getting into oncology in a big way in the next 2 quarters, putting together a strategy to see how we can have a separate vertical dedicated only for oncology-based, data sets and help those, efforts and initiatives in that domain.
This is Rob. I put a note there. I had a question, Ram, and maybe Stuart can address it as well. First, an observation, a couple observations. One is that I think in some of the statistics and estimates you guys include, I would cite the sources of that because it adds more credibility to the slide and presentation. I saw the Microsoft Azure side, but I think to the extent some of the estimations from COVID to just the market share to the patient churn, I think that would be helpful. Secondly, one thing I didn't see is, are you guys venture back now? How are you funded? I mean, you mentioned some individual investors, but pending that answer, that pivots into what's my. So, do you have a sort of is there a venture group involved with you all at this point, or is it all sort of founders and friends and family type thing?
Sure. Let me answer the first question. Clearly, all the numbers, on the presentation, it comes from, very credible sites, and I'm happy to send you those references your way. Not a problem. And to your second question, in terms of, how we're organized, I bootstrapped the company, and we have a lot of great angel investors, a couple, including Anil and Ajay, on the call, including Stuart. Stuart's actually an investor in the company as much. We took a very atypical approach towards this. We're not venture backed. And there's a reason. I'm happy to share you offline. And but the goal is actually to get venture backed, in a very short timeline, because the company is at the juncture that actually we have all the right metrics, and now we just need to pour gasoline on the fire, if you will.
Yep. And that goes to, I think, Stuart, the question for Stuart, because Stuart, you mentioned how in your hospital system with the number of beds, how COVID has been tailwinds to this company. That was one of the things that I sort of picked up, that, hey, it seems like you guys are you capitalized enough to take advantage of the opportunity, because you have to, there's certain documentation things or certain things you have to, to have cleared through Washington. But yeah, I agree. This is an interesting area and time of convergence of tailwinds. So you've got to be both capitalized, but then operation-wise, you got to deliver to the customer. So, Stuart, you're kind of a customer as well, it sounds like.
Yeah, not a customer of Buddy with my current organization, which I joined about 6 months ago. So I'm new to that organization. But your point is well taken, in that the capital has often been a barrier to technology adoption in healthcare as well. So you'll find many companies address that with making an operating expense model and kind of the consumption pay as you go, which is something that Buddy has also revolutionized in terms of coding, right? You can now just consume this on a per chart basis. You're not making a big technology investment. The cost of entry is really pretty low once you get into it. So that has been a challenge for healthcare, and the adoption is technology is expensive, and we're competing on the IT side usually with clinical technologies that, do you want to invest in a computer system, or do you want to buy the new whiz-bang MRI that's going to get you, patients from the competition across the street? And that's a battle that we usually lose on the technology side, because on the IT side, the clinical technology usually leads to capital fight.
Shri here. Could I ask a question? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yeah. So Ram, I think that's a great presentation. I appreciate you taking time and talk about Buddy. So we have, I just wanted to tell you that we have about 30 oncologists. We work with a bunch of people. Public Tupel Health, we work with them. look at the AI and look at. My question is, I think very fascinating to me that you're solving the ICD coding and billing and all this stuff. I mean, that's a great first segue. I mean, there's a lot of data even now about how we use the drugs and what medications, and a lot of people actually do the clinical trials. And yeah, this is a dose to give it to people. But in the clinical trials, you have the people who are young buffs and highly organ functions normal. But we are using the real world. 80-year-old gentlemen come in with some bad kidney and you don't know what to dose them. But the point I'm making is I think there is a great opportunity here, a data mine, see what the real world experience, obviously, how people use, how doctors use. Some of the drugs we don't follow, especially oncologists are very rebellious. They usually change it according to the patient rather than read the drug label. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think probably you may be working with, this is a low-hanging fruit probably for you as well as other people. You said it is a disease agnostic and also the platform agnostic, right? You work with Onco EMR versus Epic versus anything else, right? I mean, obviously, the data mining, I think a lot of pharma companies are looking at, the beyond phase 3 trial, phase 4 safety monitoring, how people use it. I think they made some changes. Actually, it's very interesting. Even the FDA approved some of the drugs in a certain way after a real world. FDA now put out that, you could submit us some real world experience and we will change the package label. You don't have to run another clinical trial and all this stuff. So point I'm making is probably low hanging fruit is some of the common drugs are already approved drugs, how you capture the data based on ICD-10 and to go back and review that and how people are doing. That's one thing. And also you could see maybe, I think somebody asked a question of how do you manufacture drugs and what we need in the, we also do a lot of diagnostics, like for example, foundation medicine. There is a lot of genomics involved here. And there's also, we don't usually go by what cancer we treat. Obviously we treat based on the target or immunotherapy or whatnot. It's very fascinating. I think we're just scratching the surface here. People like you and other data scientists and venture capitalists, and there is extreme amount of the work to do. Which I'm very amazed, I think, the way, it's a solve. I think you understand the basic problem. What is the root cause? How do you come up with upstream, downstream? You talked about that's extremely important. A lot of people doesn't ask the question. They want to solve the middle of the road approach rather than asking the fundamental question, how we can solve from fundamentals to root cause to the upstream and downstream. I like that approach. Thank you.
Okay, so Sri, I'd love to connect with you offline. We are out of time today on this forum, but if you could drop me an email, I think let's hop on a call. We are getting into oncology and the real world evidence that you're talking about, and share our thoughts and see how we can partner.
Absolutely, thank you. Love to connect. I think AJ Khanna, you could please connect us both, please.
Hey Ram, I think David, who's a sponsor of the group, asked a good question. If you could address that for like 30 seconds.
Which is, can I understand?
David, question is
when you talk about 200
So good morning. So if I understand correctly, your end users are the payers.
No, actually, our end users are the providers, but they can also be the payers for a different reason. The payers actually want risk adjustment, like HCC or HEDIS measures, essentially to understand the risk score of the population so that they can tweak the health plans and improve their, margins, if you will, on the payer side. On the provider side, both we can have, products for both of them, if you will. We have products for actually the payers. We have products for the providers. On the provider side, we're trying to actually help them, getting their codes actually streamlined, optimized, according to the CMS, which is actually the golden standard of the country, and essentially making sure that the claims are actually spit out. So that's the quick answer.
Right. So if I may for a second, Marianne, if I can grab 30 seconds just to see where this fits in with other software out there. So if I take it from, if your end user is the provider world, right? So we know that there's a whole ecosystem out there of two competing ecosystems, actually, more importantly. There's companies, and I'm just going to use one out there, like Claims Trust, whose sales pitches, we're going to enable you to maximize the value out of your credentialing agreements on one side, and then you have the guys like at HMS, who are chasing after and dealing with the, competing with them, who has a smarter software to deal with the unbundling that Claims Trust is bundling and trying to play with that. So when you have those two ecosystems, where does your technology fall into play, and how do you, get in as, within that world, right? We're not even getting into the fact, just one other thing why I brought up that comment, just to throw out there, if I may, is that if you think about the employer-sponsored world, which is about 50% of the people in this country are covered through employer-sponsored healthcare, just the sheer number of databases that exist between the ultimate HRIS system that exists, that is tracking those employees till a check is actually being sent to that provider, is probably a dozen ultimately systems that a claim touches, right? That's through the process. So that's just something else from a streamlined, I'll call it the Holy Grail. But if you want to just address for a second, if we have permission to go over, is this concept of, you have these two competing forces, who's smarter, bundling or unbundling, right, between a Claims Trust and HMS, and where do you fall into that world?
Well, to simply put, Dave, this is a much longer conversation. 30 seconds is going to be, I'm not going to do justice to it. But let me give you the nutshell answer. In the fee-for-service world, which is actually getting transformed very slowly into the value-based care world, which is the bundled world and the value-based care world that you're talking about, the answer is both needs to be addressed. As much as value-based care, the bundling, the capitation, the managed care, all of that world exists, fee-for-service exists as much, which is, there's a fee for a transaction, which also exists in America today as we speak. It is complicated. So to give you the nutshell answer, Buddy is actually trying to solve both. Right? When we talk about, we are a technology company first, and then we are talking about functional automation, like medical coding or measures automation, or we're getting into the payer on the prior authorization automation. We are not really tied to the actual business model per se of healthcare. Business model of healthcare is actually evolving, as we speak with the Affordable Act Care and whatever better, policies the lawmakers are going to come up with. But what we are focusing on is a fundamental approach towards automation in terms of actually, how we can optimize the claims for the providers. And we go to the payers and help them understand how can we improve your automation on the prior authorization? Because there is problems on every vertical that we're talking about, right? So we know we're not married to one vertical. We're not married only to the providers, as we also automate HCC for payers. We also automate, HEDIS measures for payers, which is very critical for them to see how can they optimize their health plans. So I think it's a more fundamental conversation than at the policy level or the business model level that actually we're aligned to one versus the other.
Yeah, and if I could just a few quick seconds on that. Ram has said this earlier and says again, there's not a healthcare business model. There are a number of unaligned verticals in the healthcare industry.
Competing.
Right? And they're competing. And as a provider, we have to do both. We have different types of payers, etc. Ultimately, and this is starting to happen now, the most important vertical in healthcare is going to be the consumer, and it's going to be about choice. It's already moving in that direction, and the millennials will kick it over the top as we go. Because what's going to really happen is they're going to start having choices. And once they understand what their options are, and they understand that the insurance companies and the providers are all looking out for their own interests, and there's not any place in healthcare where somebody's looking at this as an ecosystem and saying, ultimately, this is about the health of the patient, right? And so something's going to look over all those verticals. I think it's going to be the patient that ultimately says, enough. I'm going to be the one who takes charge of my health, and I need the data with which to do that.
Right. Now, for the Holy Grail would be integrating the fact that the actual user of the healthcare delivery system, right, the patients, right, the members, need to finally have accountability, because this is the only process in the world that I can think of where the user has no accountability for the costs.
Correct.
Because if they're not accountable for their chronic condition, they see no change in their costs.
And then healthcare only deals with about 5%, and I'll have to find the right sources, so this is anecdotal, to maybe 10% of health, which is what this already boils down to. So as a patient, the healthcare system in all its verticals only is about 5 to 10% of your health, right? The rest is lifestyle and all the other things that you do. So it's a very, very complex issue. If we get into that, how do you solve the problem of not healthcare but health? It gets much more complex, and that's a whole separate discussion. So I'll stop there.
I got another engagement right now, but David, Rob and Sri, you can find my contact with from Ajay. It's rs@buddy.ai if you want to write it down. Love to continue the conversation.
Yeah, Ram, we'll send out, we'll do a follow-up email, and it'll include everybody. If anybody added on themselves late, we add them. We'll send a list with everybody's contact details, and yours is listed there too. So if anybody want to continue the conversation, this was really great. Thank you, Ram. Thank you, Stuart and AJ, and thank everybody for joining. So with that, have a great week, everybody.